Written over 2,000 years ago, Titus Lucretius' Carus epic poem expresses completely modern notions. For example, empiricism, a theory of atoms, a theory of evolution, the notion of prehistory, and Epicureanism's morality and psychology. Helping to ignite the Renaissance, it is considered most important. On this video, you may learn details about a section of this epic poem. Lucretius on Nature, Book 3. The Dead is Dead. This book begins by eulogizing, praising, an unspecified person. I deduce that Lucretius is praising none other than Epicurus. Take, for example,
"We all nourish on your resplendent, golden sayings, each worthiest of eternal life. From thy revealing thought sprang forth a proclamation worthy only of a god."
Yes, this unspecified bringer of reason explained nature itself. Now we must understand the human spirit itself. In accomplishing this, the first task is to
headlong drive out the dread of Acheron, for it most of all perturbs our human life.
By Acheron, I should explain, is meant death or afterlife. In Greco-Roman mythology, Acheron is the river that dead souls must cross on their way to Hades, the netherworld. The poet then psychologizes humanity as he says that although many may claim not to fear death or divinity, but rather pain or disgrace, this is not true. This is a lie that people tell, but is proven false whenever they fall in misfortune. The poet says,
"Wherefore, it is surer testing of a man. In doubtful perils, mark him as he is. Amid adversities, for then alone are the true voices conjured from his breast."
Conversely, it is said that whenever they are not preoccupied with death or tragedy, human beings tend to struggle and compete, even bring onto themselves possible death, for the sake of transient, ephemeral, goods such as wealth and fame. There is also a mention of envy as a driving force of human action, but let me quote,
"Some perish away for statues and a name, and often to that cause, the fright of death. This fear plagues upon their sense of shame, and it easily breaks the ties of camaraderie. Often were traitors to country and dear parents, through quest to shun the realms of Acheron."
Yes, these two things harm humanity, fear of death and meaningless desires. They may only be cured through a correct understanding of reality. As for the mind, the poet starts by saying, unequivocally, that it is not contained by any single part of the body. He draws an analogy to health as he says,
"You have good health, although it is not contained in any place, so likewise find that mind is not fixed in any part of man."
I found surprising to see that the poet did not identify the brain as the source of consciousness or spirit. Rather, subsequently, all argumentation presupposes that mind is everywhere in the body. I guess this makes sense if you include the nervous system. Either way, to Lucretius the mind is completely dispersed along the parts and portions of the body. Curiously, he identifies different qualities to it, or different kinds of it. He speaks of this life-giving mind or spirit as heat, but also air, and even two others unspecified substances. I must admit, the details are not clear. Concerning the various terms, consider how he clarifies that.
"Mind and soul, I say, are held conjoined one with other, and form one single nature themselves."
This is necessary to claim or clarify that the soul is not as if separate from any other portion of the human being. Either way, first he indicates that the mind, like the body, may suffer illness and pain. This is a natural result of the fact that mind, and therefore soul, being corporeal in nature. To put so in technical terms, Lucretius is arguing against any kind of dualism. He insists, time and time again, that all sensation, as all thought, is a physical process caused by the movement and interactions of certain special atoms. Consider how he says,
"Nothing is seen to happen with such speed as what the mind proposes and begins. But although so agile must of seeds consist, most round, most tiny that they may be moved when hit by the slightest of impulses.
Yes, what explains the quickness of sense, response, and control of the mind over the body is the smallness of the atoms. Remember, as he reiterates, the largeness and coarseness of an atom determines the swiftness of their motion. Throughout the book, the poet frequently addresses possible challenges to the whole theory. First, there is the question that when a human or animal dies, his weight is not reduced although his life is gone. Ergo, says the opponent, how could life be material? The poet responds by making reference to the existence of odors.
When an unguent's perfume delicate into the winds away departs, thereby nor aught abstracted from its weight. No marvel, because seeds many and minute produce the smells.
Of course, this is a self-confirming proof. After all, it is only valid if one presupposes the existence of atoms, particularly as the cause of smell and taste. LOL. Lucretius then attempts to explain just how it is that sense may function. His reasoning is not clear to me. Safe to say that the particles are small and sensitive enough. Funny enough, the poet does excuse himself on the subject as he says,
My countryside pauper speech constrains me sadly as I can, however. I'll touch some points along the way.
On the next book, he will return to this subject. For now, he says that various emotions are caused by different atoms. Rage is a heat or fire, while fear is a cold. Rather simple, LOL. Either way, it is clear, says the poet, that different humans or animals have souls or minds that are more predominant in some of these atoms, which in turn explains their different behavior or temperament. This is not to say that therefore behavior is restricted or determined by atoms. Remember, he already expresses belief in free will. Herein there is no rational materialism. Instead, consider how he says,
Through training make yourself refined. Those vestiges of nature left behind, which reason cannot quite expel from us, are still so slight that naught prevents a man from living a life even worthy of the gods.
As such, a person has natural inclinations, natural temptations and drives. However, he may control these. I am obliged to note that whether human beings can or cannot control their inclinations or temptations is irrelevant to the question of free will. Switching topic, the philosopher argues that the soul may not sense or perceive without the use of the body. He refers to Democritus as a great mind who proposed that
Of body and mind, each superposed on each, vary alternatively and interweave the fabric of our members.
This is to segue into the idea that the soul requires the body in order to exist. Yes, that the soul is mortal is the next great argument of the poet. Not only that the soul dies, but that it comes into existence at some point in time. He says that the soul may be destroyed as water may be evaporated, such that, although it is still the same atoms, it is no longer water.
Sure, if body, like as a jar, when shivered from some cause, cannot any longer hold the soul, how then? Think'st thou it can be held by mere air? Besides, we see how mind comes with time. Along with body, both grow and get old.
So, 2 points here. 1, that there is no reason to suppose that mind may exist without the body. 2, that mind grows with body. Ergo, it could not be before the body, and it could not be after it. Needless to mention, this point is highly, extremely controversial throughout history. Once again, the poet makes the point that mind, soul, may grow sick. He describes many illnesses of the mind that I deduce to be madness, coma, and epilepsy. All to say that
Wherefore mind too, confess we must, dissolves suffering, as well, disease and contamination.
there is also reference to the effects of wine and drugs as evidence that mind and soul must therefore be corporeal. Again, if it can be afflicted by wine, then
it would happen that it would perish.
the point is also made that if the mind could as if exist without the body, then it could surely not sense, perceive, or act without it. The reasoning being that it would lack the likes of nose and eyes, lol. Likewise, there is the fact that all living things naturally fear death. Whereas if soul lived on, mind would not care for death. It would merely, in that case, be like a snake that sheds its skin. Most jocular is the question of whether the soul has parts. If any part remains alive if separated from the body. Rather horrifically, Lucretius describes battle scenes wherein sides, wielding chariots, cut off enemy soldiers' limbs. He says,
"All the while the mind and body of the man can feel no pain for swiftness of the wand."
I do not know how much of this is possible. I reckon that it is possible for someone not to feel the pain for a fraction of a second. Either way, the whole description is rather horrific. It is all to say,
So shall we say that these be souls entire in all those fractions? But from that it would follow, one creature would have in body many souls. Therefore, the soul, which was indeed but one, has been divided with the body too. Each is but mortal.
To be clear, there is reference to how severed limbs may briefly move despite no longer being connected with the rest of the body. This, the philosopher assumes, is the effect of the soul dying violently. There is also the question of no man being able to remember past lives. Herein there is reference to creatures that are born from a rotting corpse. The poet takes this to be proof that parts of soul are left behind, not entirely dissolved, by a lack of functioning body. The reasoning is that worms that may rise from a corpse themselves contain a little bit of soul. As such, it is argued that if somehow you were to reincarnate or live some sort of afterlife, your soul would lack parts. The parts that the worms and the creepy crawlers use. There is also the absurdity of supposing that there are souls in waiting. That is, souls that are waiting for bodies. The point is made that a human soul could not possibly enter but the body of an animal.
Or mind, immortal but inclined to change body. How topsy-turvy would earth creatures act? The Herkenhound would flee the onset of antlered stag, the scurrying hawk would quake along the winds of air at the coming dove.
I wonder what a believer in reincarnation would say on the matter. What is worse for the idea of reincarnation? There is the question.
How can a wise become a dullard soul?
As the objectors would claim that the soul changes according to its body, Lucretius is quick to point out that,
be this so, it is needful to confess. The soul is mortal, since it is so altered. Throughout the frame, it loses the sense that made it what it was.
Alas, this is quite the conundrum. How can one be one if one does not preserve the memories or the body? In what sense is that the same soul, the same as before? Of course, the only answer requires to be more than a single entity, to be a present, an unknown future, and a forgotten past. Alas, such is the condition of the human species if the species were a single entity. Why should the present generation care for the next, and how easy it forgets or misunderstands the prior generations? I quote the following because it is so comical.
Again, at wild and civilized parturitions, at the rites of love, souls should stand by. Ready at the side, is it not ludicrous that immortals line up for their mortal drawers, innumerable waiting for love's completion? All contend madly to gain the new body.
The point is made that it is nonsensical to assume that something immortal may be joined with something mortal, especially if the immortal is to fear, to suffer, for what occurs to the mortal. This is to segue into the folly that is fearing death, regardless of whether the soul is or is not immortal. That is, the folly of fearing real, absolute death. The poet begins by saying,
just as in the ages gone before, we felt no touch of ill when all sides round to battle came the Carthaginian host. All humankind doubted to which the empery should fall. Thus, when we are no more, when comes that sundering of our body and soul.
Yes, to die is as it was before birth. No more, no less, Curious how challenging it is for most alleged sapiens to conceive and to accept such a thing. I rather enjoyed the historical reference. I imagine that referencing such a bygone era would make the rhetoric even more powerful. By the way, you may learn about the wars between Rome and Carthage from Polybius. The point is made that fear of what will happen to one's body and property after death is but mere imagination. Lucretius indicates how the thinker often imagines himself as if he could stand beside his now-dead self. The poet then speaks as what a chastising deity, one that chastises man for wishing to live forever. First is mentioned the pain of losing a loving wife and kids. These are insinuated as the best joys and treasures a man may ever attain. Then, the deity says,
"Yet, no longer unto thee remains a remnant of desire for them. As for the mourner, why the bitterness? That the dead is not to waste in eternal pain. If, after all, death is but sleep and rest?"
The point is that death is the very cessation of desire and thus of pain.
Death is, then, to us, much less, if there can be a less than that, which is itself a nothing.
Let me quote some more of what this deity, nature itself, says to the man unwilling to let go of life.
"Why not with mind contented? Take now, thou fool, thy unafflicted rest? Why seek to add more, which in its turn will perish foully and fall out of in vain?"
This is to say that death is not worth lamenting, since without purpose, life is not worthy of concern. In fact, what the superstitious or overly religious fears is often already the case in present life. Not only are we all, says the poet, as a Sisyphus who struggles in vain for things that will wash away like the boulder that rolls down the hill, but some of us meet in this life tortures such as those imagined in the depths of Tartarus, hell. There is the retribution that fellow man exerts upon his neighbor. There is the competition for the truly worthless, such as glory and renown. There is the pangs of conscience regretful of some past deeds. The philosopher says,
"Of truth, the life of fools is Acheron on earth."
Thus, to him who may be worried about incoming death, it is best to remember that all meet an equal fate. I rather loved the following section, of which I will only quote some lines.
"And Scipio's son, the thunderbolt of war,
horror of Carthage, gave his bones to earth.
Like the lowliest villain in the house.
Likewise, great scientists and artists.
Even Epicurus went, the light of his life.
Ran out, although genius who overtopped.
And overcame all other human minds.
Wilt thou, then, dally complaining to go?"
With some slight modifications, it is a passage worthy of memorization. The human is described as perpetually unsatisfied with all in life, as he wonders and searches, never satisfied for long. Yet, when life itself is at risk, he holds nothing else as more important. Lucretius speaks of the latter almost as foreshadowing Schopenhauer's will to live. Of course, on this channel you may also learn about the German philosopher. Then, the most harrowing observation about the temporal dimension is made.
"Nor by prolonging life take we the least away from death's own time, nor can we pluck one moment off, whereby to diminish the aeons of not being alive. Eternal death shall ever be the next stage."
I have heard this point in favor of justifying prolonging life, in the sense that it is a waste to die early, as death is so vast that it will not be prolonged, but life is so short that it would be shortened. However, in Lucretius I find my own inclination. Life is as permanent and as consequential as a dream. The next book not only defends empiricism, attempts to explain dreams, but also provides a theory of evolution that is 2,000 years older than that of Darwin. Don't miss it. Now, to pique your curiosity, to motivate you to watch the last video of the series, I gift you a teaser sample of the many aphorisms I crafted as I read this author.
"Since compared to death any life is ephemeral, What makes a good life is not a matter of how much time it lasted.
Compared to the eternity of death, the longest life is but a mere point, and a point has no volume, it is truly merely imaginary.
As humility is tested by power, and friendship is tested by misfortune, so too only the necessitous may demonstrate commendable honesty.
If you enjoy or gain from my aphorisms, know that I have thousands. I will be writing books with short thematic essays composed out of aphorisms. These essays are profound and intriguing yet easy to read. For very cheap copies, look up Protagoras Pause in the Amazon website. I repeat, Protagoras Pause, that's my name.